Right. I think we can, I think it's 1 o'clock and we can start. Welcome to the, wait a minute, I'm just admitting somebody. Welcome to the May meeting of the Authority. Most unusually, this is online because we've not got a particularly big agenda today, and it just seemed not good value to ask people to come from both as far away as Aberdeen and Cornwall just for a couple of hours. But the July meeting and the meetings in the autumn will be quite substantive. So I think we should, we decided that we could have this one online. Apologies from Tim Childs, and also apologies from the team at our sponsor team at the DHSC, who are unable to be with us today. As usual, the meeting is being recorded in the interest in transparency, and the recording will as ever be placed on the HFEA website. We do have some external observers. You're very welcome that you're online. So in the usual way, can we just start off with declarations of interest? Geeta, I think, is the only one.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. I'm a clinician and license holder at License Clinic.
Great, thank you. And Jason, although not a member, you are an external advisor, so just going to go to you as well. Who is not here at the moment, but will come at some point.
Jason appeared and he's disappeared again. I think we might have to just give it a minute, Julie, because a couple of people are having problems kind of with sound. So perhaps we can just hold 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure. I've noticed. Oh, here's Jason again. Jason, are you on and can you see and hear us? No, obviously not. Gudrun, are you on? And because I know you're having problems, can you see and hear us? No.
If you just give us 30 seconds, Julia, because we're manually working through. If people are not accessing it through their HFEA account, we just need to manually do it. So give us half a minute.
Okay, you just tell me when we can restart. We okay, Claire?
I'm just trying to check if there's any authority member that we can't see. Zainab and Gudrun, I can't see on my screen, but I don't know if anyone else can.
I can see Zainab.
Catherine's now in. You can see Zainab. Okay, she's not on my screen. And Gudrun is just the final person who.
Okay. I think
is in. Okay.
Okay, great. So I just welcomed everybody, and Jason, just a conflict of interest. We came to you as an advisor.
Yep, so I'm person responsible in a licensed clinic.
Thank you. So everybody's okay. If anybody has problems seeing or hearing or whatever, just either put your hand up, or if you get disconnected, message Claire, and we'll try and sort you out. But hopefully this will be okay now. Right, so minutes of the meeting of 20th of March 2024. Everyone has seen them. So firstly, are there any comments on the minutes? No, I can't. Oh yes, Catherine.
It's just a very small point. Could I please request that wording of section 9.4 on page 10, could it just be looked at, because it seems to confuse the issue of compensation to donors abroad and alignment with compensation to donors for their donations that are imported into the UK. I just think it needs a bit of clarification.
Okay, thank you. We will take a look at that. Any other comments? No, great. So matters arising, there's only one matter arising that isn't otherwise dealt with elsewhere in the agenda, which is item 9.16. I'm asking for the authority to delegate responsibility to me for signing off the amended direction 0001. That, if you recall, is to implement the increase in donor compensation rates that we that we agreed last time, basically the inflationary increase. So if you would just delegate authority to me just to sign off on the regulation as and when it's completed. Thank you. I'm seeing lots of nods. Anybody not happy with that? Put your hand up, I think. No? Okay, let's just assume we'll proceed on that basis. Thank you. Now we come to the Chair and Chief Executive's report, when Peter and I just talk about what sort of we've been up to. I had a very enjoyable, although sadly very short trip up to Dundee, where I spoke at SHREG, which is the main sort of fertility conference in Scotland over the years, and I spoke about donation, the opening the register, what it means, who can do it, what are the consequences, and so on. And there was lots of interest. I've had quite a few emails subsequently with questions, and I think was well received. The other thing that's happened of note is that, together with a team from our sponsors and 2 independents, I spent 3 days interviewing for new authority members. As you might know, we've got 4 spots that are vacant. One is for an embryologist, basically to replace Jason. The second is for somebody with a legal / sort of ethical background to replace Jonathan. The third is somebody with a sort of science, genomics, genetics background to replace Gudrun. Gudrun and Jonathan stepped down after serving 2 terms in July. And the fourth is really a new position of someone who has experience as a patient advocate, which we thought would be really important on the board. I'm delighted that we had quite a strong field. We have made our recommendations, and they now go to the Cabinet Office. They then go from the Cabinet Office to Number 10's office, and then Number 10's office will have to come back and either suggest other people or approve our recommendations. That process is ongoing, and I will let you know. Hopefully we'll be able to make an appointment, well, hopefully by the end of the summer, which will help us if when existing members have to step down. But I'll keep you posted as and when. Peter, I think handing over to you.
Thank you, Julia. At this time of the year, it's very much sort of there's a lot of work going on in terms of, we've just finished obviously the business year at the end of March 31st, and so 2 processes are in train. There's the whole sort of year-end annual report and accounts process, and I'm hugely grateful to Tom and colleagues in the finance team for sort of leading on that process. At the next Audit and Governance Committee meeting, there will be a draft annual report and set of accounts, so an awful lot of work is going forward to that process, and Tom can say a little bit more about the NGO position later. The other thing, and in parallel, is what's called the sort of annual accountability process. So for the public record, As an arm's length body of the Department of Health, we are sponsored by the Department of Health and accountable to Parliament through the department, and they run a regular accountability process with us, as they do with all their public bodies. That involves, as it says in the meeting, what's called quarterly accountability meetings. This is where the department talk to us about our progress on our business plan commitments, and we're now building up to what's called the annual accountability meeting. I'm pleased to report to the authority that in terms of our business plan commitments, that process will reveal that we have essentially met the commitments in our business plan, and particular highlights which I think are worth putting on the public record at this stage are, of course, that process of the last year also involved us being reviewed as part of the public body's review process, where, as you know, the HFEA came out with a strong endorsement that it should remain as an independent arm's length body, and also a set of recommendations, which we have reached agreement with on the department, and I'll be reporting to you over time. And the other thing I think to say just generally is that, and we'll look at this a bit later, is that, on the basis of our performance, I think given the constraints throughout the year, we can report a significant story in terms of meeting our performance. And of course, the year was also marked by us producing for the department in November a comprehensive set of proposals about law reform. Now, they will, there'll be some months before we're clear where they're going, but I think taken in the round, what the annual accountability process will reveal to you as a board is really significant progress over the year. Traditionally at this time of the year, I write to the department formally setting all that out, and I will of course let all board members see that communication when it issues in the next couple of weeks. Obviously happy to take any questions about any of that.
Any questions for myself or Peter on anything we've been doing? Okay. And our annual, as Peter said, the annual accountability meeting with the sponsor, where we sort of go through everything, will be happening towards the end of June, and we'll report back after that meeting. So now we come to the committee chairs, and firstly, can I ask Graham to speak about Licence Committee?
Thank you, Julia. I'm about to sign off the minutes of our last meeting, where the agenda was short, but the meeting was quite complex and lengthy, given the serious matters that we had to deal with. The renewal of the suspension of one clinic was reported on BBC News, and while the media coverage was nothing like on the scale of the initial suspension or what happened in the wake of it, I think it came as a reminder that we do our work, well, we don't do our work in some sort of regulatory bubble. It can feel sometimes like that when you're online, but that there's a lot of interest out there in what we're engaged in doing. We had an update on an incident at another clinic, a matter that's ongoing, but I think possibly the most pleasing dimension was in relation to a clinic which has had a long history of poor compliance. And the interim inspection there, which was happening during a very short license period, so it was really, it was a means of keeping an eye on a clinic very closely during what was only I think, if I remember rightly, a 2-year license period, showed the clinic in marked improvement. And in the past couple of years, I think it's fair to say the committee has become more vigilant in ensuring compliance and less inclined to trust that modest improvements would be sustained without more oversight. And this was an example where I think a rather more rigorous approach paid benefits without going down the route of revocation or suspension, which we continue to believe ought to be very much a last resort. But we're trying, I think, as a committee, and I pay tribute to Ali's chairmanship, in getting us to look at ways in which we can use the powers we possess in relation to the inspectorate and to the guidance with which we work, to ensure consistent improvement, especially in clinics which have had a very, very poor compliance history. So I think it was pleasing to have that in the midst of rather more complex and sometimes depressing matters.
Thank you very much. That's good to hear. Jonathan, would you like to talk about the Statutory Approvals Committee, please?
Yes, so you'll see from the paperwork we've had a pretty busy few months. I'll just highlight one issue, which you'll see on the paperwork, that we've been looking at outdated and potentially offensive terminology used to describe conditions, and actually over the last year or two we've been seeking to make sure our registers try and avoid that language where possible, and it's been quite a bit of work with the executive going through that, and I think we're pretty much done on that. And I think the HFEA has been leading the way in trying to make sure the terminology used is appropriate for the individuals who have these conditions.
Thank you. That's good to know, because I know that was beginning to be a bit of an issue. AGC, neither AGC nor SCAC met in the last term, so there's no updates from them. But has anybody got any questions, comments on either of what Graham or Jonathan has raised? No. So Graham, please report back on the Homerton suspension and so on in July. So now we come to the performance report. Everybody will have seen it, and I'd like to ask Peter and some of the directors to highlight some of the issues, as we do every time, raised in that. Let's start off with Peter, literally to provide an overview of sort of where the year's gone. It's been an extraordinarily busy year, and I think perhaps it's worth just remarking at this point that Peter and the SMT, Rachel, Claire, Tom, and their teams have really worked extraordinarily hard this year and have really achieved an awful lot. So we are absolutely indebted to them, and I know authority members have felt that they've all performed to a really high standard, and we're very grateful to them. So Peter, do you want to give a little bit of an overview of the year? I think your focus will be particularly on HR, and then we'll move to Rachel, Claire and Tom.
Thanks very much, Julia. Yes, so members will know at each meeting we report our performance against an agreed set of metrics. We also, during the year, at this point in the year, produce a sort of year-long snapshot against those metrics rather than a sort of 3-month rolling average, which I think gives you a better sense of performance across the piece. The slide on the screen at the moment shows the red, amber, green status against those metrics, and clearly those numbers have bounced around a bit over the course of the year. What I would comment on, and I hope this is a sort of general direction, you'll see over the last 4 months or so a marked reduction, a steady reduction in the number of red indicators, and in particular I'd like to pay tribute to staff for sort of some of the progress there. We've resolved the number of long-term problems in terms of some of the finance indicators, which is what's showing that sort of improvement. So I think generally, if you were measuring the organisation on the basis of its KPIs, it's clearly at times been a difficult and testing year. I'll leave it to other directors to talk about some of the detail of that. But I think there is generally within that fluctuating position an improving picture. Before I go to HR, you'll know that normally at this time in the meeting I also say something about our big information projects, namely PRISM. PRISM is in place and has been for some months and working well. The primary task now, which is underway, is to validate all of the data submitted over the last couple of years that we present at a clinic level in what our Choose a Fertility Clinic function on the website. That process is progressing. It involves a lot of work on our side and a lot of work on the clinic side because of the PRISM and the transition of the register. There's more data to validate this time than is typical, so the task is bigger. We won't know for some time, a couple more months really, whether all clinics will be ready by the autumn, because it's in the autumn we are scheduled to publish the update of Tutor Fertility Clinic. But I will, of course, keep authority members appraised of progress on that as we go along. And normally we provide more information at our Audit and Governance Committee as well. So moving on to the HR indicators. Just a couple of things to mention there. You'll know that we measure two things, or we report to you two things. That's staff sickness absence rate and a turnover rate. And I'm pleased to report in terms of staff sickness absence, we've seen a general decline across the year. We have a target of around about 2.5%, and we're currently sitting at about 3.5%. If you strip out a few members of staff with long-term absences, that number is well below the 2.5% level. So when I look at these numbers and I look at other public bodies, I'm pretty comfortable with what the staff sickness numbers are telling us about the general health of the workforce, leaving aside some of the positions of one or two members of staff, which, given we're such a small organisation, can easily distort the figures. The picture on turnover is a little bit trickier. So what we do there is we have a target range between 5 and 15%. And whereas at the start of the year we were in that range, we have steadily moved beyond it. I've talked the reasons are, as I think we've talked at board meetings before, a combination of people moving on possibly for promotional opportunities because of the public sector pay position or something else. And in a small organisation, turnover is inevitable for those kind of reasons. What I would say is that about 4% of that figure, so we're currently standing at about 24%. I think you can strip out about 4% of that figure because it's not really measuring turnover in the way it's traditionally understood. So our turnover rate is around about 20%. Clearly that's higher than the range. And ideally it's higher than we would like it to be. But actually when I look at the essential sort of characteristics of the organisation in terms of the percentage, the sort of years that staff have been and so on, that's a manageable figure. It would be ideal if it was a little lower, but it's a manageable figure, and I think it's an inevitable consequence, as I say, in part about a small organisation, and in part because if people have been with us 3, 4, 5 years, it's not at all surprising that people seek to move on anyway. So there's a sort of sense in which this is an inevitable feature that we just have to manage. I think in summary, turnover is higher than ideal, but it's certainly within manageable ranges at the moment. So I'm going to pause there unless anyone's got any questions, and if not, Julia can pass on to one of the other directors.
Julia, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Sorry, just before I do, Catherine has a question.
Just a comment, Peter, on turnover. I think you've been entirely fair and candid. Completely right. But I think it's also important, especially for external observers, to know that generally the executive and the authority too are by far from complacent about turnover, and indeed are actively considering all the time ways in which we can improve the non-reward package to all our staff. And there have been a couple of really significant factors this year that have struck me, in particular the introduction of wellbeing days, but also the efforts that have been put into ensuring that colleague morale is very high, and those are really palpably recognised in the annual staff survey results, which show exceptional commitment to the authority. So I think it's important just to put that comment on turnover, which is fair, in context.
Thank you, Catherine. I think that's right. I mean, effectively, our morale figures, or the sort of basket of indicators that contribute to that, are consistently above the civil service average. And I think we've also got, I mean, retention is really crucial here, but clearly we've also got better at recruitment. So there is a sense in which we now do recruit, I think, more quickly than we did in the past too. So there's a sort of sense, I mean, ideally what you want to do is keep staff for longer still, but at least when we lose them now, we are considerably more efficient in the time it takes us to recruit staff and get them in, which is not only good for the business as a whole, but is also then good for morale, because we know that one of the key factors on morale is the sense in which the people who are left in an organisation with higher than average turnover feel that they're doing extra work. So the quicker we can get new people in, it's good for the organisation and it's good for the workload of the existing staff.
Thank you. Graham.
Yes, thank you. It's noticeable that media programmes and perhaps even news reporting of incidents or coverage of a suspension seems to cause a bit of a spike in inquiries, whether by email or telephone or in other ways. And it occurred to me that some of our law reform proposals, if they gain traction, we might expect quite a lot of media coverage and perhaps a considerable increase in public inquiries. And I would have thought an increase in parliamentary questions, which I noticed over the course of the past year have faded away to almost hardly any. And I just wonder where the reserve capacity to cope is, because even with our careful preparations for OTR, it's very demanding to keep up.
It's a very fair point, Graham, and maybe Claire might want to come in on this as well. You know, I mean, parliamentary questions in a way are the most disruptive of all because they have the very, very tight turnaround times, and certainly they do fluctuate. We can go through periods with quite low numbers, and then it can get very busy indeed. And you know, you can see there, if you just go back to June when there were 12, well, 12 will take up quite a lot of people's time, you know, at 2 or 3 day turnarounds and so on. So you're right, Graham. You know, I think the honest answer with you is that when we face these kind of spikes in interest, something else just has to give, because you know, I've said this before, the public sector expenditure position has been tight now for very many years. There is not the slack in the organisation that can just, you know, of sufficient spare capacity that it can cope with those kind of increases. So effectively we have to make just difficult decisions about what, you know, what happens. I think you're right as well. I'm sure law reform proposals, if they are taken up by whatever government, will generate considerable interest. Claire, is there anything you want to add to that while we're on this topic?
No, I don't think there's anything to add. I think, you know, Graham, that you're right, that particular media interest does lead to kind of spikes, whether it's in parliamentary questions or public inquiries, but also to freedom of information requests. I think the most significant media activity in the last few months has been the Born from the Same Stranger programme on ITV, which that led to kind of a direct number of OTR inquiries, direct increased number of OTR inquiries as well as general inquiries. So I think that's sort of the most significant one that had an impact on our ability to do work.
Okay. Thank you. Alex.
Thanks. And I suppose the other kind of drill down on turnover is, you know, a lot of organisations do is that kind of putting people informally in that kind of 4x4 grid. You know, was it a good move for the individual and was it a good move for the HFEA? So in Peter's analogy of an individual that's given us 4 or 5 years of service and has gone on for a promotion, we'd probably tick both of those boxes. But where you see organisations where, you know, the staff are disappointed someone has left and they've said, oh, I'm just a bit burnt out and I haven't really got anywhere to go to, but I'm handing in my notice, you'd put them in that lower quadrant. And so you know, I don't want to kind of put individuals in boxes as it were, but I find that drill down very helpful, that, you know, if you wish them well, it's worked out both, whereas if it's been a bad experience on both sides, then we might want to raise a red flag.
I agree, Alex. So we do exit interviews for everyone who leaves, and you know, and overwhelmingly they'd be in your box, your two tick boxes, if you like. These are people who sort of say, you know, I like the organisation, I like my colleagues, I find the work interesting. You know, either I've sort of been here a number of years, it's difficult for me to see where my next step is in a small organisation, or even if it's just it's time for a change. That can be in a quite positive. There's a time for a change in a sort of positive sense, and there's a sort of I'm desperate to leave this organisation. And overwhelmingly, the exit interviews point to people who feel that it's time to move on in a positive sense. And you're right. I mean, I think on the whole, you know, I mean, some roles are more crucial than others in the terms that they carry very, very particular skill sets which are difficult to replace. But if we've got a good 4 or 5 years out of people, that's really all we can ask, and we do wish them well. And I can think of a number of colleagues this year who've moved on to promotion, and that's great.
Yep, thank you. Rachel, let's turn to you.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I'll start with compliance, and I think it's important to note that workload for the inspectors has been extremely high over the last year, and it remains high with both the scheduled inspections that they have to do, but also all the extra inspections we do, sort of those ones for regulatory oversight, enhanced regulatory oversight, or incidents or complaints. Long-term absence and turnover was particularly challenging for the team last year, and absence is still impacting the team, but recruitment for various posts is going well, and new staff that we took on at the back end of last year are settling in well. But I think we really do need to thank the team, as many inspectors picked up extra clinics in their portfolios and also additional inspections. If you look at the KPIs, the important thing to note is that no licence has been impacted by the challenging time the team have been through. So we are seeing some positive improvements to the KPIs over the year, especially those reports going to PRs. But also what is important to note is that the inspection reports to committee, there will be times that are genuine where inspection reports breach KPIs, and that's because we do a very robust post-inspection process following a C&E process, the compliance and enforcement policy that we've got, and we do management meetings, we do C&E assessments to make sure that we are making consistent decisions about what regulatory action needs to be taken. So I thought it was just worth mentioning that. Moving on to OTR, everyone is aware it's been a particularly challenging 12 months with increased applications, but also with the different aspects of the work that the team members have had to undertake. We really feel now that we've turned a corner. We've got new team members settling in well, and the focus now is processing the applications. We had a spike in application numbers at the beginning of the year, which was mainly due to publicity and media such as the TV programme, but they've fallen back to sort of what we class as normal levels now, about 100 per month. The new systems have made a huge difference, and last month the team really focused well on applications, and we managed to close 137 in April, and so far in May we've closed out 58, so that's really positive for the team. The new software that we've got, the Microsoft Dynamics, has really opened up a lot more opportunities for us within the team, and we're now able to look at the number of different applications by application type and separate them out into dashboards, and it's that we're now looking at to develop new KPIs. So the team are feeling much happier, I think, where they are at the moment, and quite excited about the work that they can do going forward in tackling the backlog that we've got still on the waiting list, because we are aware that waiting times are still too long, but we feel like we can make a headway on those now. I just thought I'd mention that I went to the Donor Conception Network meeting a few weeks ago on Saturday, 4th of May, and it was a very positive event. I spoke about the OTR service. There were lots of questions about the process that we have, the interaction with clinics, a few questions about 10 family limit. I had some very good feedback about information that had been received by the OTR team, which I thought was very positive. And I very much enjoyed the day and felt it was thought-provoking for me in my position at the HFEA, but also a very positive day and interesting to go to. And then to IT, we've just started the pen test, which is due to finish by the 17th of May for the infrastructure. Hopefully we'll get the report 1 to 2 weeks after that. We were audited for business continuity in January, and we've got recommendations that we can implement to improve that, and we will work on that over the coming months alongside other priorities that we've got. DSPT, the team, and Alice from Information Governance, who's doing a fantastic job, are all working really hard on the audit and the submission. The audit started on the 13th of May, and the report is expected to be finalised by the end of June. And then finally, a huge piece of work which will be started will be Epicenter replacement, which is our internal system for licensing. At the moment, we have received approval from DHSC Digital Tech Controls team to move forward with that on now. So we're at the process of looking at reviewing, scoping it out, and then moving towards the tender procurement, which will be done over the next few weeks. But that's a very positive transformation change in IT that we'll be moving forward with.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Rachel. So any questions on OTR inspections or anything that Rachel said? Firstly, I just want to say that, you know, send the inspection team a big thank you, because they were under a huge amount of pressure this year, not least because of the decisions to suspend a license or change things, and they've done very well. I had a question for them, but firstly, I see Geeta has a question, so I'm going to go to you first, Geeta.
Sorry, Julia, it was a mistake. I meant to thank the inspection team and put my thumb up instead. It wasn't raise my hand.
Okay, so that's great. But I do want to just come back because as a number of authority members will know, during COVID, I think we sort of we changed the way we did inspections into a hybrid. So we do a lot of the paperwork on a desk-based, and then we go in and do our physical inspection. Takes less time because we can be more sort of in the room rather than chasing paper, and that seems to have been very well received by clinics, and I think continues to be well received, and we keep that. But you know, the inspection regime, if you like, is the cornerstone of what we do. It's really the bedrock of our work. And I just wondered, Rachel, when you know, we reviewed the way we do inspections and so on, clearly during COVID, and how does it work in terms of reviewing the process and every few years and making sure that, you know, it's still fit for purpose? I'm sure it is, and that we're getting feedback from clinics and so on, and just managing the process, just overviewing the process, because obviously it is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. It is important to review the process and look at it going forward. We do receive feedback from PRs. There's a questionnaire that's been designed that will go out to PRs, and also, like, we use the GIA audit scheme to look at that, from looking over it from an external perspective, and we received a substantial grading for that for when they reviewed how effective the scheme is. But certainly it's something moving forward that we will always continue when we get the space to do that, to be able to review and make improvements.
Good. Okay, great. And well, you know, I guess this is something that we should keep under review because it is so important. But as I say, for the moment, it's been a great year, and there's been a lot of pressure on the inspectors, which hopefully is now calming down a little bit. And on OTR also, just thanks to the team, because the spike in applications, particularly in February after the TV documentaries, I think was not particularly expected. And I think people, you know, it was dealt with very effectively. I imagine that you are be interested in your view, but I imagine that you're expecting that, you know, these spikes will continue, as there will be presumably more, you know, media interest that will come and go, and as soon as something happens or there's an event that sparks interest.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, TV and media will obviously make spikes in demand. And also, I think as we move forward with the increased number of donor conception births and change in family formations, we are going to see a year-on-year increase, with probably, I think, a spike after the 2008 changes were brought in. So, you know, in a couple of years' time, we'll start seeing many more application types.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. Claire, over to you.
Thanks, Julia. I won't go over kind of everything from my side that you've had updates on throughout of the last year, but I suppose a few highlights I think it's worth mentioning. And you know, thank you to all the SAC committee members, who I know it's quite a committee that meets very often, but in the last year, over 200 new conditions have been approved by SAC for embryo testing, which I think for those patients and families involved is a huge achievement. And I should say particular thanks at this time of year to our governance and licensing team, together with those people who administer other panels like the Register Research Panel and SCAC. We normally have about 50 to 60 formal meetings of the authority and subsequent committees a year, which all involve kind of attendees to gather around the table, papers to be written, minutes to be taken, and then those licenses to be given out. So thank you to everyone involved with that. We've also embedded our new approach to the strategic risk register, which is overseen by AGC and authority. So thank you to Shabir particularly for that. You can see the number of PQs and FOIs in the performance report. The FOIs in particular can involve a lot of very data heavy requests, which are very time consuming within the time allocated for FOIs. So there's a lot of detailed information on that. And I know that in the paper from Kazuya this afternoon, she'll talk a bit more broadly about the data that we give out, as well as kind of over 2,000 public inquiries, all of which are responded to individually. You'll know a lot about our statistical reports and our new dashboard, which has had an amazing number of views. We also increased media coverage over 30% compared to the previous year, which we consider a success. I know that Graham pointed out to some of the media coverage from licensing decisions, which is perhaps not necessarily driven by us, but a response to kind of things that we're doing. And we're continuing to deal with the consequences of that, if you like. But there is certainly a lot more media coverage that we've driven as well. On my side, we've had 2 audits, one on the code of practice that was successfully went through with some minor recommendations, and one on the Register Research Panel, which Kazu is going to talk about a bit later. So I think that's all I wanted to say on the kind of work from last year. In terms of current work and work we've got coming up, we're going to see about the SIs, the statutory instruments Annabelle's going to talk about in a few minutes. And that's quite an intensive period of work with the statutory instrument on posthumous use that was just laid in Parliament last week. And the government announced the statutory instrument on shared motherhood and HIV positive donor screening today. So that will be discussed later on. We're planning for the launch of Fertility Trends next month. We had successful stakeholder meetings with our professional stakeholder group and our patient organisational stakeholder group, where we gave updates on our areas of work and got feedback on several different areas, including particular aspects of law reform, our horizon scanning process, and we also raised any of the relevant recent authority decisions and discussions for their interest. And lastly, on Friday is the BECA annual conference, where I will be giving an update. So BECA is the Infertility Counsellors Associations, the professional body for fertility counsellors. I'll be giving an update on HFEA activities in the morning, and Rachel will be speaking about opening the register in the afternoon. And lastly from me, this weekend is the annual fertility show at Olympia in London. This is something we've kind of had a greater or lesser presence at over the last 5 or 6 years. I know Geeta is speaking on Saturday, particularly about ethnic diversity and fertility treatment, and I'm very pleased that the talks that both Geeta's giving on Saturday and I'm giving on Sunday about how HFEA information can be used to help navigate a patient's fertility journey, both of those talks are free for anyone attending the fertility show, which I'm really pleased about, and I can report back about that in a future meeting.
Claire, thank you very much. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions in a minute, but let's firstly go to Tom.
Thank you. Just starting on the KPIs, I suppose the first thing to say is we have a very small finance team within the HFEA, and we've had a significant vacancy through most of the year. We've only had a full team really since the last quarter of this year, and I think the impact of having a full team is visible in the KPIs, and we're certainly able to focus on those a little bit more. I think on debt in particular, we've also had some support from across the organisation in chasing some of the harder to reach debt, which has been very helpful. So I would like to say I'm extremely grateful to Lillian, Nick and Marunki for all their hard work within the finance team, keeping our finances in order throughout the year, because it has been tough, and we, as I said, we do have a small team. Regarding the 23-24 financial position, as Peter said, we've kind of closed the books recently, and the external audit started in earnest this week. The draft bottom line position is an underspend of around £230,000, which is a bit of a shift from the roughly £100,000 overspend that we had been forecasting for most of the year. And I suppose sitting behind that, our annual income was below budget, but it was below budget by less than we expected, by around £30,000. We had a shortfall in GIA during the year, but that was balanced by actually really high interest on our cash reserves, as well as slightly better IVF activity than we'd been expecting. Our spend was under target, but by a little bit more, by around £270,000. We spent less on staff, particularly due to vacancies, but also other kind of corporate areas, including things like legal spend. As we previously indicated to the board, our spend on IT, though, was much higher than we'd originally included in the budget, mainly driven by inflation. I would say there's a big caveat to that draft position. We are going through audit with the NEO. It is likely that there'll be some changes. In particular, we're doing some analysis at the moment of duplicate invoices that have been sent out from within PRISM over the past 3 years, and working between the PRISM team, finance and the NEO to kind of estimate the value of those duplicate invoices and the value of the likely refunds that we'll have to make in 24-25. So when we get that estimate right, we'll put that into the numbers as well. For 24-25, as I think it's kind of clear, you know, our bids to the department have been accepted, and we're running through a process of replacing Epicenter, which is extremely positive, looking at procurement now. So more or less on 24-25, the budget is as presented to the authority back in November. We'll kind of do a full forecast and review the position when we get to Q1.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody. Perhaps this is a good time just to step back a little bit, because we usually have these performance rolling reports, and now obviously this is a year-end one. And we look at performance generally from the year. I mean, my feeling very much is that the team's performed really very well. We've got a lot of wins. We've had to deal with a lot of quite difficult things without additional resource. So, you know, OTR, although we have had some additional resource, it's not nearly as much as we would ideally have liked. We've had to deal with IT systems, and although PRISM is embedded, you know, we've had quite a few issues that we haven't that we've had to sort of make do. Luckily now with Epicenter coming on stream eventually, that will be very helpful. We've had some difficult things to do in the inspection team, like for example, suspend a license, which takes up a lot of work and which, you know, was not expected. And I think, you know, this shows the challenges that the team faces, as well as all the business as usual. And, you know, we were able to deliver proposals on law reform to the department pretty much on time in the way we said we were going to do. And that's a big achievement. And one of the things for next year, as we're looking at our strategy for 2025 to 2028, is to try to work hard to make sure that those proposals do eventually end up on the statute book. But it's quite a good time to reflect. And I was just wondering if anybody would like to share any observations or reflections, or they had any questions for the team in this regard. Catherine, let's start with you.
Thank you, Julia. I agree that this is a wholly creditable and transparent report, and it's very high quality, it's very detailed, and it tells a very good news story, which is entirely consistent with our commitment to putting patients first. I suppose my more general reflection is whether, in addition to this necessary detailed reporting of what we do and holding ourselves to account for what we said we would do and what we have in fact undertaken, we don't also need, when we're thinking about our future strategy and our future reporting, we don't also need to think about the degree to which what we do has impact. So, for example, in addition to reporting and detailing quite the huge successes that we've made in difficult circumstances in the inspection regime and in OTR, whether we don't need to find both quantitative but also qualitative measures of the impact that we're having for patients, for the sector. And my further reflection, thinking more about that, is that I think that the direction of travel now that I'm hearing for all regulators is holding ourselves to account to gauge how far we are really achieving what you might call that regulatory sweet spot between achieving very high overall, demonstrable overall levels of compliance, but also and properly holding to account all of those that we regulate and taking swift action where they're found wanting, but at the same time being recognised by the sector that we regulate as not just a thought leader and a standard leader, but actually a facilitator to themselves raising their game. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that any of that is easy. It's not easy to come up with the right KPIs, and it'll take a lot of work. And the combination of the quantitative and the qualitative is clearly something for complex further thinking. But it does seem to me that for future annual accountability rewards, I think that that's something that I would really welcome for us. And I suspect that both patients and the community, those that we regulate, would welcome it too.
Thank you. Rachel.
I would just say that we do have the annual report, the state of the sector, which documents and gives the amount of non-compliances that are critical, major, other details, or the incidents and complaints. And we also have the quarterly governance. So although the quarterly governance isn't obviously in a report and formal documents as a KPI, it does show compliance on a 3-monthly basis. But the state of the sector does actually look definitively at year on compliance to see how the sector is performing as a whole.
Peter?
I very much agree with Catherine in terms of, impact is the thing, isn't it? It's easy to measure. Well, it's easy to measure the things that are easy to measure, sort of thing. And sometimes they're meaningful and impactful, and sometimes they're not. Do you think, Catherine, looking across other bodies, do you, can you point to people you think who are getting closer to identifying kind of impact measures that we can consider?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy to take that offline, Peter, but it is definitely a challenge that I see a number of other regulators, and indeed particularly NAO, House of Lords Select Committee reports, bringing out as a theme that there needs to be more demonstrable measurement of impact. Yeah,
helpful. Thank you. Let's have that conversation.
Great. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, and thank you, Claire, Rachel, Tom, Peter, for that. And as Rachel said, a lot of what we've done will be in our annual accountability report, and that will also help us plan for future work. And we are, of course, doing all the work on the strategy, which the board has been very much involved in. So moving on to the RRP, which is the Register Research Panel, which we don't often hear a lot about. We hold a statutory register of all patients, partners, donors, treatments, and children who've been born as a result of these treatments. We've delegated to the Register Research Panel the power to authorise access to the register, for example, for people to use that data for medical or non-medical research. And we require it, however, to report to us annually. And this is what this section is about. We've had the report, and we're asking Amanda and Kazuyo to report to us. This is also particularly important, I feel, because we've had many discussions about how we can make our data more available and how it can be used, and that's quite complex. It's not a very easy thing to do, but I think be very interesting to hear what the RLP has to say, because I know that making better use of our data and making it more freely available within careful circumstances is something that I and many board members feel would be really important over time. So over to you guys.
Okay, I'll start us off with a bit of an intro. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So the HFEA, as you know, holds what is thought to be the longest running fertility database in the world, with records dating back to 1991. So that's over 30 years of data right now. It holds records on all patients, partners, donors, treatments, and any children born as a result of this treatment. Of course, a key strategic aim that we have is to ensure that people can access the right information at the right time, and using this register data effectively is, of course, an important aspect of that. Next slide. So reasons why we collect data. So how do we use it? It allows us to retain oversight on what's happening across the fertility sector, look at trends and see where improvements could potentially be made. Based on the latest evidence, and making data available to researchers conducting important research, which Kazuyo is going to touch on more in her half of the presentation. We also publish reports of interest to the public in order to drive improvements in the sector and highlight the data that we have available on our register. Next slide, please. So in the last financial year, the publications that we've had were Fertility Trends 2021, Preliminary Trends and Figures. This was the first publication where we used preliminary data and the first year in which we used data coming out of PRISM as well. So it was a bit more complicated than previous versions, but we ensured that limitations were outlined throughout the publication. And it was also our second version of the Ethnic Diversity and Fertility Treatment report, which was published in December. With this report, we published a call to action with other stakeholders such as RCOG, looking at how the sector can work to reduce disparities that we're seeing across ethnic groups. We've also worked to, sorry, can you go back to the last slide? We've also presented some of these publications at academic conferences. Kazuo presented the Ethnic Diversity and Fertility Treatment publication at Fertility 2024 in January, and is going to be looking to present, of course, ESHRE and other conferences as well to highlight the work that we're doing and highlight to researchers the data that's available to them to do further research on. Next slide. As well, this year we've published the HFEA dashboard, which was published in January and is what we believe to be the world's first fertility dashboard covering IVF and DI treatment. It's an important step forward in making more data available to the public, as it allows users to customize data based on their specific areas of interest. It was viewed over 30,000 times in the first 2 months and received generally very positive feedback on the feedback forums and from stakeholders. It's also was well covered across media publications. Particularly of interest, it was covered quite well in local news. I think that's probably due to the fact that the data can now be split by region or by nation quite easily in the dashboard, depending on where someone lives. The plan for the dashboard is to publish it along with Fertility Trends to update that. So with the upcoming Fertility Trends release in June, we'll be looking to provide new data with it. And just to touch on other areas of work around the dashboard, we published an instructional video along with it, which is about a 2-minute explainer video, just in case someone's struggling to understand how to filter the data based on their areas of interest. We have additionally a landing page with FAQs and an explanation of limitations or how it compares to other publications that we've had. We presented the dashboard while in development at the Royal Statistical Society in September, and we've just received news today that we've been accepted to present 2 presentations, one on the final version of the dashboard and one on the work that we've done around ensuring that the dashboard is accessible as well to the next Royal Statistical Society conference.
Right.
And the last way in which generally we make data available to the public is through data-related inquiries. So this is FOIs, PQs, or other questions that we may receive in. We had a slight increase from the previous financial year, about 3%. So data-related inquiries, we had 132, FOIs 64. We've also seen a bit of an increase in complexities in FOIs that we've received as well, and then 19 PQs. Importantly, as you'll have seen from the last section of this meeting, 100% of our FOIs met the deadline as well, which compared to sector average, I think only 75% meet it. And then with the slight increase that we've seen in data-related inquiries, importantly, a third of requests since the launch of the dashboard can be referred directly to it, reducing the workload for the team. And I'll pass over to Kazuo now.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. As Julia mentioned, that since the introduction of the 2010 HFEA regulation regarding disclosure of information for research purposes, the authority has delegated the Registered Research Panel, the RRP, to authorize access to personal data for research purposes. Between since the last update in January 2023 to the last month, we have seen a slight increase in the number of applications. And then crucially, we have seen a new research group applying and then being granted access to register data for their research. So in this period, RP met 5 times and then reviewed a total of 11 project applications, including 5 new applications, 2 applications for the second review, and 2 amendments, and then 2 renewal requests. So during this period, 2 projects have been fully approved by the panel. The first one is the project application from University of Aberdeen, looking at the impact of duration of freezing of embryos. So this is a very relevant topic following the legislative changes in storage period in 2022. The second project is application from Gaia. They plan to make an IVF outcome prediction model using machine learning technique. The tool will be made available publicly and freely on their website, including the details on the methodology used. So in total, we have 10 projects currently active. That we recently launched individual project pages as shown in the image, and we provide lay summary and public benefit statements. So we hope that this increases transparency of our data use and more idea to researchers who are interested in our data. Next slide, please. So one of the key outputs from the RP is publications. Since 2010, 24 peer-reviewed papers from RP project have been published, and 26 papers used our anonymous HFEA data. So the topics of the recent papers are varied and includes from on the right, looking at the long-term consequences of ALT on children using register and also the NHS data. Another group compare the prenatal outcome between the breast stool and the curved stage embryo transfers. The other group look at the reproductive outcomes following the surgical sperm retrieval (EXI) compared with those using EXI, using ejaculated sperm. On the left, this paper look at the long-term healthcare utilization and the cost for the ALT children following the large data linkage with general practice data. The last lead, we collected add-on data, PGT, and then this paper argued the methodological flaws in many of the previous studies looking at the effect of PGTA. So the research using our data is clearly making substantive and methodological contribution to our knowledge, but importantly, they are informing clinical practice and then policies in fertility sector. Next slide, please. At the last update in in January 2023, you may remember that the authority agreed on our proposal to modernize the 2010 regulation on data use for research purposes. And we have submitted a brief to the department last year, and we are currently waiting for their responses. In the same meeting, the authority member also agreed for the proposal to explore other consent option in the same meeting. So we are exploring option to change from the current opt-in system where patient and partner provide explicit consent to disclose their personal information to the opt-out system similar to the national opt-out. And then secondly, following the public bodies review last year, RP was also audited by the government internal audit agency this year. We are pleased to inform that we received the highest rating of substantial assurance. And the overall comment is that processes and procedures are in place to ensure that the RP is effective and ensuring that the authority complies with its obligation when sharing the data. The report also mentioned that the application and the review process places appropriate weight on ensuring the legislative requirements are met. And then it also acknowledged the work to improve the RP processes in recent years. Next slide, please. So as Julian mentioned, we'd like to increase the use of our data and then to lead to the increase of high quality research using our data and then to improve the patient care. we have several planned work to enhance the research engagement. The planned activity includes the launch of a quarterly new research newsletter and 2 webinars next year to explain our data and then demonstrate how our data have been used in the current RP project. Also, we plan to increase the opportunity to directly speak to researchers through the academic conferences, also by holding round table to coincide with the data validation to update anonymized data. And then lastly, we continue to streamline the RP processes by providing more information to researchers. Thank you very much. This is the end of our presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. That was really interesting. So firstly, any questions, observations? Geeta.
I really just have a comment to thank Amanda and Kazuo for their incredible work, considering how complex our database is and also the protective nature of the data that we hold. I've been at the other end as well, requesting data for research, and I know how hard it is for them to give us specific data. And thank you for the good work you did for ethnic disparities in fertility treatment to get that data out and get the second report, which has been very useful, and also submission of abstracts at scientific conferences on that. Yeah, and it's great work, and I really like what you have planned for the future, working directly with researchers and roundtable discussions and being at academic conferences. Thank you for that.
Anyone else? So I echo what Geeta says. I think, you know, the slide which shows the work for 2025 is really, really encouraging because, you know, in order to attract research projects and attract good scientists to come and want to, you know, use our data, we need to be you know, in their environment. So presenting at conferences and making ourselves much better known, I think would be wonderful. Because, you know, I'm conscious that even I remember when I was at Fertility 2024, which is a big conference, you know, someone came up to me and said, "Oh, you know, it would be lovely if you could make your data available for research." And I'm like, well, we do, but you know, I think to some extent we're still a little bit of a well-kept secret, and I think what you're doing to widen our ambit and to make us better known is absolutely excellent. The only question I had, and this is not for sort of now, but this is just for future thinking, is that when we produce reports like the ethnic disparities report, it's clear that there are a number of research projects that might well come out of that data, because we know, for example, I don't know if I'm just making this up, but you know, if, for example, we say, well, outcomes for a certain section of the female population are worse than for others. So there are a number of reasons that could be, and there are a number of different groups who might want to do research projects, like sociologists or economists or doctors or whoever, scientists, whoever it is. Do we ever, through the RP, think, well, actually, this might be a nice piece of research, and actually proactively try to, if not approach specific groups, but at least sort of put it out there that actually, if you wanted to do a piece of research on, I don't know, socioeconomic disparities between a certain cohort of women or something, you know, we'd like that done, because quite often when our reports come out, I think, gosh, that's lovely, but the data's great, but I'm interested in why this happens or why that happens, and that could be a really good master students project or something. You know, how do we, or how can we, do you think, match some of what we're showing in our data with very necessary projects to explain that data? I'm probably waffling a bit, but you're getting the point.
Yeah, I think just to touch on when Kazuya was mentioning the roundtable with researchers, I think one of the things to consider with an update to the anonymized register data is considering potentially research topics. So making one a bit more tailored towards ethnicity research, so then they don't even have to apply, let's say, to the RRP. And it is something that we've discussed about kind of whether we should be highlighting topics that are very possible with register data, but have been underexplored on our data research webpage. So it's definitely something that we've talked about.
That would be great. So Francis and then Zeynep.
So there are often trainees, fairly senior junior doctors, so-called, approaching consultant level, who'd be very keen to do a project for 3 months, 6 months, a year, or whatever. I wonder whether it's worth approaching the Royal College of Obs and Gynae to the section that's involved in developing curriculum for trainees and so on, particularly if we've got projects in mind and the data, we're simply looking for somebody to do it, because I know sometimes people find it quite hard to think of a project to do, and there may well be equivalent people we could approach in the various professional societies. You know, the Association of Clinical Molecular Geneticists, for example, if we had something that we wanted people to do, just letting them know that we've got the projects and the data, and they're welcome.
Yeah. Interesting. Zeynep.
Yeah, huge thanks to the team. This is obviously the result of an enormous amount of really hard work, and I really welcome making the data much more accessible and really strengthening those potential links with researchers. I mean, just like what Julia said, in the past we have used HFEA data for our student projects at the Institute for Women's Health at UCL, and that's worked really, really well. And I think one of the things we might think about doing going forward is almost creating a sort of a self-selecting group. I mean, certainly this would work in social science. There are some very specific teams really concentrate on work in this area. So Professor Nikki Hudson's team at De Montfort University, at Cambridge, us at UCL Institute for Women's Health, and at least, you know, if we had sort of slightly stronger links with those group leads and supervisors, and then had a range of kinds of tie into sort of our preoccupations or our interests, then that could really be a mutually beneficial relationship in terms of, you know, the kinds of different years in which we could get students to particularly master's students to concentrate on specific lines of research. And I think the webinars is a really good way to think about how to build that link, particularly with the group leads of research institutions that work on these areas. And I'd be really happy to work with Amanda, you and Kazio to think about, you know, who we might approach to see if they might be interested in being part of some kind of network like that, because I think it'd be a really brilliant idea. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, just to touch on kind of the work that we have given kind of small projects to MSc students in the past. For instance, the National Patient Survey, we've had a couple of follow-on projects looking into kind of the free text and a bit more granular at the data, because obviously our reports kind of look more broadly at general trends there. And we also have another MSc project looking at multiple births and how that compares using birth rates using single compared to double embryo transfer, and kind of how that works out as well. So I think it is something to further explore, but of course it requires a bit of time as well to prepare data sets specifically for MSc students. So I think we obviously have to prioritize kind of what's going to be most valuable for us to prepare, and considering how many we can do in a year as well.
Gudrun, Jason, and then Claire. No, Claire's not. Okay, Gudrun.
I was just going to echo what Zeynep said. I recently did a sort of research. Sorry, my pitch is frozen, but I'm still here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Right, again, there we go. I recently did a sweep of all of the MSCs in a particular sociological area for mothers and small babies for another charity. And we basically listed all the MSc courses in the country that had these things in that particular area. I would be happy with Zeynep's help, if she's got time, or just on my own, to do this for Amanda and actually send her a list of all the MSc courses that fall into reproductive biology, genetics, rare diseases that might pick up data from assisted reproduction. Just send her a whole list and the name of the person who's running the course.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Gudrun. Jason.
Yeah, I'm basically repeating what people have said already, but I think there are large cohorts of students that might benefit from this, particularly the STP training group, the scientist training program group, who are up in Manchester. There's a large cohort there. And also the higher specialist trainees, the scientific higher specialist trainees, as well as the medics who are on the specialist training schemes might also benefit. So there is scope there, but I take on board the point that actually it does create work as well. So
yeah. So we don't want to overwhelm you. On the other hand, I think you can hear that we think this is really brilliant, and we should, to the extent we can, expand our reach on this. But I think you've got some offers of help, so please take them up and let some of us do the work for you, if that works, without putting you under a lot of strain. Because I do think that over time, the more it's known that our data is available, and the more projects we can attract and also help us design projects that we think will help us to interpret our data, will be really helpful. So that's great. Thank you both very much indeed. So now something a tiny bit technical. I think, as actually Claire noted, we discussed a bit earlier, there are two areas of legislation which, if passed by Parliament, will affect our sector. The paper proposes changes to the information. It's to do with essentially what you need to do, and we've spoken about this before. It's the statutory instruments relating to shared motherhood and so on. You need to also agree to delegate some powers to me for signing off. And also we want to update some of the standard licensing conditions, and we want to update General Direction 0007, which actually you can see from the papers list, a new consent form, and other guidance also, if needed, in line with proposed changes that are actually all set out in the paper. So it's all quite technical. Annabelle will just guide us through it step by step so that we can sign off on each constituent part, and hopefully that should be pretty straightforward. Annabelle.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me today. I'm Annabelle. I'm going to talk to you about, as Julia just said, two separate statutory instruments. I know you'll have already seen the paper, so I won't be going through the whole thing, but I just want to draw out some of the really key information for you. I'll start by quickly recapping the background to the work. So as I've already said, the paper encompasses two separate statutory instruments. The first one relates to posthumous storage of gametes and embryos. The most important thing about this one is that it applies to a narrow cohort of patients who died before the 1st of July 2022. And the change will allow their surviving partners to store gametes and embryos for longer. And this is to rectify an unintended consequence of the 2022 storage laws. As Claire mentioned earlier in the meeting, as an update on this since the papers were circulated. So this change came into force at the end of last week. So we've published updated guidance for the sector and are continuing with our work to implement the changes. So as I say, that is the first statutory instrument. The second statutory instrument relates to screening infertility treatment, following recommendations from SABTO that the law should be changed in two areas. So the first change relates to the definition of partner donation to allow couples undergoing reciprocal IVF to be screened as partners rather than donors. We really welcome this change. It's something the HFEA have been calling for some time. I'm sure you'll all agree this is really fantastic news. As I said, this statutory instrument encompasses two things. So that was the first one. The second one is to allow individuals who have HIV with an undetectable viral load to donate gametes and embryos to known recipients. And known donation there encompasses surrogacy. So this would apply to intended parents providing gametes as surrogacy arrangements, say. And again, as Claire mentioned earlier, there's another update on this since the papers were circulated. So you may have seen announcements from both the DHSC and from the HFEA just this morning to welcome the changes. And these contain more and up-to-date information that you might find helpful as well. Hopefully that was a helpful recap. So the reason why I've brought this to you today is obviously just for information, so that you're aware of these changes. But as Julia mentioned, I also want to request that you delegate some powers to the chair to approve the regulatory materials that we will need to implement these changes. So firstly, these are updates to the standard licence conditions for both Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and an updated General Direction 7 to include a new consent form. And as I set out in the paper, it's possible that there'll be other regulatory materials, but that would all be in line with what's in the paper and what I've spoken about today. So that was everything from me. Thanks again for having me. If there are any questions, please let me know.
Any questions for Annabelle? I have to say, Annabelle, when I first became chair, I went to see a particular clinic, and the doctor who was in charge of the clinic, PR there, explained to me the inequity of people with undetectable load of HIV not being able to donate sperm other than, say, to a female partner. And at that time, I didn't really understand what she was talking about, other than it sounded like it was not very, not a very nice thing. And as time has gone on, it feels, not only inequitable, but the fact that there didn't seem to be much medical, anymore, a medical reason for it. So I think this is really, really welcome. And quite apart from that, we all know that the inequities in the so-called system of shared motherhood, of additional screening for same-sex female couples is again really inequitable and something that should go. So I think we welcome these, really, the fact that they're finally coming into law. It's marvellous. So firstly, is everyone happy for delegated powers to me? I mean, it's something slightly different on the general directions and so on, if there's anything extra. Yeah, I'm assuming that's all fine. So you've got your consents. Claire.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Apologies, Annabelle, my internet's a bit sporadic, so you may have said this, but just to say, as Annabelle, I'm sure you said, the posthumous use one has been laid in Parliament and that's passed on Friday, so there's kind of nothing further. The one on screening that has been announced today, so being laid in Parliament today, still needs to have a debate, some sort of debate by both the Commons and the Lords, and we don't know when that will take place, hopefully over the next few weeks before the summer. So there is still a kind of parliamentary stages in both houses. I guess we'll keep a watching brief on that to, hopefully it will all go through smoothly, and then before the summer this will all happen, but we'll have to keep a watching brief and we'll update you as and when we have any more information on that.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, no, you're quite right. It's not all done and dusted, but I think it feels as though there's a hopefully one can be reasonably positive. I mean, you can never tell, but hopefully one can be reasonably positive about the outcome, and at least the issue is being aired in Parliament in the place where it should be aired now. So let's keep our fingers crossed that it all goes through smoothly. Any other questions for Annabelle or observations? Or Annabelle, thank you very much. A great piece of work, and we're sort of delighted we are where we are now.
Thank you, everyone.
Pleasure. So that really is it for this May meeting. I think we've had so much to discuss during this last year, and the meetings have been so chock-a-block. And from July onwards, I suspect they're going to be chock-a-block again. So I'm delighted to give you back a little time in your day and have a relatively light meeting, so we can all gear up for what's coming, which I think is, strategy and law reform, and it's going to be busy. So is there any other business? Peter, do you have anything to? No? Anybody else? Nope. Okay, well, look, thanks everybody very much. It's lovely to see you. I look forward to seeing everybody in person in July, with hopefully by then I will have a little more information on new appointments. But if so, let's hope. And otherwise, have a great couple of months and see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.